The part about fate. When did it all begin? He thought. When did I go under? A dark, vaguely familiar Aztec lake. The nightmare. How do I get away? How do I take control? And the questions kept coming. Was getting away what he really wanted? Did he really want to leave it all behind? And he also thought the pain doesn't matter anymore. And also, maybe it all began with my mother's death. And also, the pain doesn't matter as long as it doesn't get any worse. As long as it isn't unbearable. And also, fuck, it hurts. Fuck, it hurts. Paid no mind. And all around him, ghosts. Quincy Williams was 30 when his mother died. A neighbor called him at work. Honey, she said, Edna is dead. He asked when she died. He heard the woman sobbing at the other end of the line and other voices, probably other women. He asked how. No one said anything, and he hung up. He dialed his mother's number. Who is this? He heard a woman say angrily. He thought, my mother is in hell. He hung up again. He called it again. It was a young woman. This is Quincy, Edna Miller's son, he said. There was an exclamation he couldn't make out, and a moment later another woman came to the phone. He asked to speak to the neighbor. She's in bed, the woman said. She just had a heart attack, Quincy. We are waiting for an ambulance to come and take her to the hospital. He didn't dare ask about his mother. He heard a man's voice cursing. The man must be in the hallway and his mother's door must be open. He put his hand to his forehead and waited, without hanging up, for someone to explain what was going on. Two women's voices scolded the man who had sworn. They spoke a man's name, but he couldn't hear it clearly. The woman who was typing at the next desk asked whether something was wrong. He raised his hand, and as if he was listening to something important, and shook his head. The woman went back to typing. Quincy waited a while and hung up, put on the jacket that was hanging on the back of his chair, and said he has to leave. When he got to his mother's apartment, the only person there was a 15-year-old girl who was sitting on the couch watching TV. She got up when she saw him coming in. When she saw him come in, she must have been 6 feet tall, and she was very thin. She was wearing jeans and over then a black dress with yellow flowers, very loose, like a robe. Where is she? He asked. In the bedroom, said the girl. His mother was on the bed with her eyes closed, dressed as if to go out. They even put lipstick on her. As she was missing was her shoes. All she was missing was her shoes. Quincy stood for a time in the doorway, looking at her feet. There were corns on her two big toes, and calluses calluses on the soles of her feet, big calluses that must have hurt her. But he remembered that his mother went to a podiatrist on Lewis Street, Dr. Johnson, always the same person. So they must not have bothered her too much after all. Then he looked at her face. It seemed to have been carved out of wax. "I'm leaving," said the girl from the living room. Quincy came out of the bedroom and tried to give her a 20, but the girl said she didn't want money. He insisted. Finally, the girl took the bill and put it in the pocket of her jeans. To do that, she had to hitch her dress up to her hip. She looks like a nun, thought Quincy, or like she belongs to a dangerous cult. The girl gave him a piece of paper where someone had written the phone number of a neighborhood funeral home. "They all take care of everything," she said gravely. "All right," he said. He asked about the neighbor woman. "She's in the hospital," said the girl. "I think they are putting in a pacemaker." "A pacemaker?" "Yes," said the girl, "in her heart." When the girl left, Quincy thought that the girl in the building and the neighborhood had loved his mother, but they had loved his mother's neighbors, but they had loved his mother's neighbors, whose face couldn't remember clearly even more. He called the funeral home and talked to someone by the name of Tremaine. He said he was Edna Miller's son. Tremaine consulted his notes and expressed his condolences several times until he found the paper he was looking for. Then he put him on hold and transferred him to someone called Lawrence. Lawrence asked him what kind of ceremony he wanted. Something simple and intimate," said Quincy. "Very simple, very intimate." In the end, they agreed that his mother will be cremated, and the ceremony, bearing unforeseen circumstances, will take place the next evening at the funeral home at 7. By 7:45 it will all be over. He asked whether it was possible to do it sooner. "It hasn't." Then Mr. Lawrence delicately approached the matter of payment. There was no problem. Quincy wanted to know whether he should call the police or the hospital. "No," said Mr. Lawrence. "Miss Holly already took care of that." Quincy asked himself who Miss Holly was and drew a blank. "Miss Holly is your late mother's neighbor," said Mr. Lawrence. "That's right," said Quincy. For a moment they were both silent, as if they were trying to remember or piece together the faces of Edna Miller and her neighbor. Mr. Lawrence cleared his throat. He asked whether Quincy knew what church his mother belonged to. He asked whether he himself had any religious preferences. Quincy said his mother belonged to the Christian Church of Fallen Angels, or no, maybe it had another name. He couldn't remember. You're right, said Mr. Lawrence. It does have a different name. It's the Christian Church of Angels Redeemed. That's the one, said Quincy. And he also said he had no religious learning, had no religious leanings. So long as it was a Christian ceremony, that would be enough. That night, he slept on the couch in his mother's house. He went into her room just once and had a glance at the body. The next day, first thing in the morning, the people from the funeral home came and took her away. He got up to let them in, gave them a check, and watched how they carried the pine coffin down the stairs. Then he went back to sleep on the couch. When he woke up, he thought he'd dreamed about the movies he'd seen the other day, but everything was different. The characters were black, so the movie in the dream was like a negative of the real movie. And different things happened too. The plot was the same, what happened was the same, but the ending was different, or at some moment things took an unexpected turn and became something completely different. Most terrible of all thought was that as he was dreaming, he knew it didn't necessarily have to be that way. He noticed the resemblance to the movie. He thought he understood that both were based on the same premise, and that if the movie he'd seen was the real movie, then the other one, the one he had dreamed, might be a reasoned response, a reasoned critic, and not necessarily a nightmare. All criticism is ultimately a nightmare, he thought, and he washed his face in the apartment where his mother's body no longer was. He also thought about what she would have said to him. Be a man and bear your cross. At work, everybody called him Oscar Fate. When he came back, no one said anything to him. There was no reason for anyone to say anything. He spent some time looking over his notes on Barry Seaman. The girl at the next desk wasn't there. Then he looked at his notes in the drawer and went out to eat. In the elevator, he ran into the editor of the magazine, who was with a fat young woman who wrote about teen killers. They nodded to each other and went their separate ways. He had French onion soup and an omelette at the good cheap restaurant 2 blocks away. He hadn't eaten anything since the day before, and the food made him feel better. When he'd paid and was about to leave, a man who worked for the sports section called him over and offered to buy him a beer. As they were sitting waiting at the bar, the man told him that the chief boxing correspondent had died that morning outside Chicago. Chief was really an honorary term, since the dead man was the only boxing correspondent they had. How did he die? Asked Fate. Some black guys from Chicago stabbed him to death, said the other man. The waiter set a hamburger on the bar. Fate finished his beer, clapped the man on the shoulder, and said he had to go. When he got to the glass door, he turned around and contemplated the crowded restaurant and the back of the man from the sports section and the people in pairs, gazing into each other's eyes, and they ate as they ate or talked, and the three waiters who were never still. Then the opponent then he opened the door and went out. He looked back into the restaurant, but with the glass in between everything was different. He walked away. When are you heading out, Oscar? Asked his editor. Tomorrow. You got everything you need? Are you set? All set, said Fate. Everything is ready to go. That's what I like to hear, son, said the boss. Did you hear that Jimmy Lowell got walked? I heard something. It was in Paradise City near Chicago, said the boss. They say Jimmy had a girl there, some bitch 20 years younger and married. How old was Jimmy? Asked Fate without the least interest. He must have been 55 or 60, said the boss. The police arrested the girl's husband, but our man in Chicago says he was probably mixed up in it too. Mixed up in it too. Was Jimmy a big guy? Weighed about 250 pounds? Asked Fate. No, Jimmy wasn't big. He didn't weigh 215 either. He was 5'10", maybe 175, said the boss. I must be mixing up with someone else, said Fate. A big guy who had lunch with Remy Burton sometimes. I used to see him in the elevator. No, said the boss. Jimmy almost never came into the office. He stayed on the road. He showed up here once a year tops. I think he lived in Tampa. He may not even have had a place. Spent his life in old hotels and airports. He showered and didn't shave. He listened to some messages on the answering machine. He left the Barry Simon file that he'd brought from the office on the table. He put on clean clothes and went out. Since he still had time, he went to his mother's apartment first. He noticed that sometimes they smelled bad. He went into the kitchen, and when he didn't find anything rotten, he tied up the garbage bag and opened the window. Then he sat on the couch and turned it on the TV. On a shelf near the TV there were some videotapes. For a few seconds he thought about checking them out, but he gave up the idea almost as soon as it came to him. They had probably just been used to record shows that his mother watched later at night. He tried to think about something pleasant. He tried to mentally run through all the things he had to do. He couldn't. After sitting absolutely still for a while, he turned off the TV, picked up the keys and the garbage bag, and left the apartment. Before he went down the stairs, he knocked at the neighbor's door. No one answered. Outside, he tossed the garbage bag into an overwhelming dumpster. overflowing dumpster. The ceremony was simple and businesslike. He signed a few papers. He wrote another check. He accepted the condolences first of Mr. Tremaine, then of Mr. Lawrence, who appeared at the end as Quincy was leaving with the urn that held his mother's ashes. Was the service satisfactory? Asked Mr. Lawrence. During the ceremony, sitting at one end of the room, he saw the tall girl again. She was dressed just as she has been before, in jeans and the black dress with yellow flowers. He looked at her and tried to give her a friendly wave, but she wasn't looking his way. The rest of the people, they were strangers, although they were mostly women, so he supposed they must be friends of his mother's. At the end, two of them came up to him and spoke words he didn't understand, words of consolation or rebuke. He went walking back to his mother's apartment. He set the urn next to the videotapes and turned the TV back on. The apartment had stopped smelling bad. The whole building was silent, as if no other, as if no one was there, as if everyone had gone out on urgent business. From the window, he saw teenagers playing and talking or plotting, but doing the one thing on its own. In other words, they will play for a minute, stop, gather, talk for a minute, and go back to playing. And after that, they stop and do the same thing over and over again. He asked himself what kind of game it was, and whether the pauses to talk were part of the game or a clear sign that they didn't know the rules. He made up his mind to take a walk. After a while, he felt hungry and went into a little Middle Eastern restaurant, Egyptian or Jordanian. He didn't know which, where they served him a sandwich of ground lamb. When he came out, he felt sick. In a dark alley, he threw up the lamb and was left with a taste of bile and species in his mouth. He saw a man pushing a dog cart. He cut up to him and asked for a beer. The man looked at him as if fate was high and told him he wasn't allowed to sell alcohol beverages. Give me whatever you have, Fate said. The man handed him a Coke. He paid and drank the whole thing as the man with the cart went off down the dimly lit little street. After a while, he saw a movie theater marquee. He remembered that as a teenager he used to spend many evenings there. He decided to go in, even though the movie had already started some time ago, as the ticket seller informed him. He sat through only one scene. A white man is arrested by three black cops. Instead of taking him to the police station, the cops take him to an airfield. There, the man who's been arrested sees the chief of police, who's also black. The man is no fool, and he figures out they are working for the DEA. Through unspoken assurances and eloquent silence, they reach a kind of deal. As they talk, the man looks out a window. He sees the landing strip and Cessna taxiing toward one end of it. They unload a shipment of cocaine. The cop opening the crates and unpacking the bricks in black. Next to him, another black cop is tossing the bricks into a fire barrel, like the kind of homeless used to keep warm in winter nights. But these cops aren't burns. They are DEA agents, neatly dressed government employees. The man turns away from the window and points out to the chief that all his men are black. They are more motivated, says the chief, and then he says, "You can go now." When the man leaves, the chief smiles, but his smile quickly turns into a scowl. At that moment, Faith rose and went to the men's room where he vomited up the rest of the lamb in his stomach. Then he left and went back to his mother's. Before he went in, he knocked at the neighbor's door. A woman more or less his own age opened the door. She was wearing glasses and her hair was up in a green African turban. He explained who he was and inquired after the neighbor. The woman looked at him in the eye and asked him in. The living room looked like his mother's. Even the furniture was similar. In the room he saw 6 women and 3 men. Some were standing or leaning in the kitchen doorway, but most were sitting down. "I am Rosalind," said the woman in the turban. "Your mother and mine were very close friends." Faith nodded. Sobs came from the back of the apartment. One of the women got up and went into the bedroom. When she opened the door, the sobs got louder, but when the door closed, the sound vanished. "It's my sister," Rosalind said wearily. "Would you like some coffee?" Faith said yes. When the woman went into the kitchen, one of the men who was standing came over and asked whether he wanted to see Miss Holly. He noted the man led him to the bedroom, but remained outside of the other side of the door. The neighbor lady's body was laid out on the bed, and beside it he saw a woman on her knees praying, sitting in a rocking chair next to the window. He was the girl in jeans and the black dress with yellow flowers. Her eyes were red, and she looked at him as if she'd never seen him before. When she came out, he sat on the edge of a couch occupied by a woman speaking in monosyllables. When Rosalind put a cup of coffee in his hands, he asked when her mother had died. "This afternoon," said Rosalind in a calm voice. What did she die of?" "She was old," said Rosalind with a smile. When he got home, Faith realized he was still holding the coffee cup. For an instant, he thought about going back to the neighbor's apartment and returning it, but then he thought it would be better to leave it for the next day. He couldn't drink the coffee. He sat it next to the videotapes, and the urn contained his mother's ashes. Then he turned on the TV and turned off the lights and stretched out of the couch on the couch. He muted the sound. The next morning, when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was a cartoon. Rats were streaming through a city, silent squealing. He grabbed the remote control and changed channels. When he found the news, he turned on the sound, thought not very loud, and got up. He watched his face and neck, and when he dried himself, he realized that the towel hanging out on the towel rack was almost certainly the last towel his mother had used. He smelled it, but didn't detect any familiar scent. In their bedroom cabinet, there were various bottles of pills of some jars of moisturizing or anti-inflammatory cream. He called into work and asked to speak to his editor. The only person there was the girl at the next desk, and he talked to her. He told her he wasn't coming into the magazine because he planned to leave in a few hours for Detroit. She said she already knew, and she wished him good luck. I will be back in 3 days, maybe 4, he said. Then he hung up, smoothed his shirt, put on his jacket, looked at himself in the mirror by the door, and tried and failed to pull himself together. It was time to get back to work. He stood with his hand on the doorknob, wondering whether he should take the urn with the ashes home with him. I will do it when I get back, he thought, and he opened the door. He was home just long enough to put the Barry Simon file, a few shirts, a new pairs of socks, and some underwear in a bag. He sat in a chair and realized that he was a nervous wreck. He tried to relax. When he went outside, it was raining. When had it started to rain? All the taxis that went by had fares. He slung the bag over his shoulder and began to walk along the curb. At last, a taxi stopped. When he was about to close the door, he heard something like a shot. He asked the taxi driver whether he'd heard it. The taxi driver was Hispanic and spoke very bad English. Every day you hear more fanatic things in New York, the driver said. What do you mean fanatic? He asked. Exactly what I say, fantastic, said the taxi driver. After a while, Fate fell asleep. Every now and then he opened his eyes and watched buildings go by where no one seemed to live, or gray street slicked with rain. Then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. He woke up when the taxi driver asked him what terminal he wanted. I'm going to Detroit, he said, and he went back to sleep. The two people sitting in front of him were discussing ghosts. Faith couldn't see their faces, but he imagined them as older, maybe 60 or 70. He asked for an orange juice. The stewardess was bald, about 40, and she had a mark of her neck covered with a white scarf, and had slipped as she bustled up and down assisting passengers. The man in the seat next to him was black and was drinking from a bottle of water. Fade opened his bag and took out the seaman file. Instead of ghosts, now the passengers in front of him were talking about a person called Bobby. This Bobby lived in Jackson Tree, Michigan, and had a cabin on Lake Huron. One time, this Bobby had gone out in a boat and capsized. He managed to cling to a log that was floating nearby and waited for morning. But as night went on, the water kept getting colder and Bobby was freezing and started to lose his strength. He felt weaker and weaker, and even though he did his best to tie himself to the log with his belt, he couldn't no matter how hard he tried. It may sound easy, but in real life it's hard to tie your own body to a floating log. So he gave up hope, turned his thoughts to his loved ones. Here they mentioned someone called Jig, which might have been the name of a friend or a dog or a pet a pet frog he had, and clung to the branch as tightly as he could. Then he saw a light in the sky. He thought it was a helicopter coming to find him, which was foolish, and he started to shout. But then it occurred to him that helicopters glitter, and the light he saw wasn't clattering. A few seconds later, he realized it was an airplane, a great big plane about to crash. Right here, he was floating, clinging to that log. Suddenly, all his tiredness vanished. He saw the plane pass just overhead. It was in flames, maybe 1,000 feet from where he was. The plane plunged into the lake. He heard 2 explosions, possibly more. He felt the urge to get closer to the site of the disaster, and that's what he did, very slowly, because it was hard to steer the log. The plane has split in half and only one part was still floating. Before Buddy got there, he watched it sinking slowly down into the waters of the lake, which had gone dark again. A little while later, the rescue helicopters arrived. The only person they found was Bobby, and they felt cheated when he told them he hadn't been on the plane, that he capsized his boat when he was fishing. Still, he was famous for a while, said the person telling the story. And does he still live in Jackson Tree? Asked the other man. No, I think he lives in Colorado now, was the response. Then they started to talk about sports. The man next to Faith finished his water and belched discreetly, covering his mouth with his hand. Lies, he said softly. What? Asked Fate. Lies, lies, said the man. Right, Fate, and he turned away and stared out the window at the clouds and looked like cathedrals, or maybe just like toy churches abandoned in a labyrinthine marble quarry 100 times bigger than the Grand Canyon.